Hey, welcome everybody to the ABT Time podcast, for which this is episode number something or other. Lost track now. We've done so many episodes, and it is 3:00 in the afternoon in California, which means that it is 8 a.m. in Melbourne, Australia. And hopefully my wonderful co-host, Dr. Jen Martin, is here with us this morning. How's everything in Melbourne?
Good morning, Randy. Pretty good, I mean, we're in lockdown, so life could be more exciting, but this week is the first week of our new teaching semester at the University of Melbourne, and I just always get excited because there's new students to bring over to the light side of learning communication skills as well as learning science, and that's a win in my book.
And despite all the riots that are making the news over here from your fine city.
Oh, look, do you really want to get me started on that? Because I will rant and rave about the idiocy of some people who seem to believe that that rioting is going to be a faster way to get out of lockdown than just actually following the rules. But I could talk for an hour and get really angry, and it probably wouldn't serve us well. So
all I can say, you thought you were better than us, but turns out you're not. You got the same kinds of people there protesting.
Yeah, I mean, it all comes back to media though, right? Because relative to the population, it's a tiny proportion of people who feel that way. Yet, of course, it makes massive news around the world. And I mean, it's incredibly frustrating on a million levels, right?
Such is the power of contradiction. I mean, that's what it is. Yep. All you need is that one voice of contradiction, and that's all it takes to fire up the narrative part of the brain. Next thing you know, you got the ABT dynamic working. That's what everybody lives for. And that is you're right. That's what we're seeing over here is this footage of, albeit small and contained little protests there, but in Melbourne, they're up in arms. That's the way it goes. And speaking of wonderful Australians, you got my email that I've listened to last week's episode twice. I so thoroughly enjoyed the three of you.
You're a sucker for punishment, Randy.
Well, I'm a sucker for the Australian accent. You guys were great last week. That was really fun, really good, deep, substantive discussion we got into that just moved right along. And as I said, we'll have the three of you back again as a team. That was really, really fun. So
we just need to make sure that next time Rod doesn't hold back so much. He was just a bit shy, I thought, last time. We need to make sure he actually tells us a bit more about how he really sees the world. It would be good to see.
Right. His self-censorship. He should try a few curse words from time to time. Or a few fewer, maybe.
We'll let him know, shall we, for next time.
It was an excellent discussion because not only did we come through a lot of cool stuff, but also there was a lot of disagreement, and you guys squared off against each other over Aussie rules football, among other things, and all kinds of other topics like that. And then you squared off on one of those PSAs, I think, that you thought was awesome, and Rod did not agree. That all makes for great conversation. So it wasn't.
Yeah, we had a really interesting follow-up discussion on email about why it resonated with me and not with him. And I reckon part of it has to do with the fact that I've lived through 6 months of hard lockdown in the last 12 months, and he is a Canberran hasn't. And I think that ad is perfectly designed for a Victorian Melbourne audience. And I just think it doesn't resonate with people in Australia who haven't lived in hard lockdown for so long. Yeah.
He doesn't have the and context that you guys have got. You've been through 7 months of and we're still locked down. Very interesting. Well, we're not done with that discussion with the four of us, so we'll have another episode. I might make it a monthly event. That was so much fun. So on that note, let's dive into
overtaking the podcast. Aussies overtaking the podcast.
Next thing you know, I get shoved out. I become the guy that you bring on once a month, and you people run it. Wouldn't surprise me.
Look, maybe every second or third month, Randy. We'll let you know when you're invited.
Well, there's a great segue from last week into what we're going to dive into in this one, which was we got into talking a little bit about the need for innovation in communication. Where is the innovation in communication? And particularly in terms of COVID here in this country, that Biden put together his advisory board of eventually 16 top epidemiologists who did a wonderful job masterminding the creation of the vaccines, but they never put together an equal and opposite body for the communication side of things. And therefore, they've ended up with exactly what you could have predicted, which was they've gotten the vaccination rate up to like 70% or something. And then there's this remaining block that is essential that they can't cross the divide with them. And lots of people blame it all on the far right. But really, when you have people, major epidemiologists, a few of whom have talked about that they haven't done a great job of communication. And that leads into the first little bit I want to present here. which was last October on Meet the Press. Dr. Michael Osterholm, the director of the University of Minnesota Center for Disease, I don't even know what it is, something in prevention, CIDRAP is their acronym, but major veteran and one of the top kind of 5 epidemiologists in this country over the past probably 30 or 40 years. He was on Meet the Press. And in his interview, he said, little thing, he was talking about communication, saying we've not done a good job of communication. And specifically, he said, we have failed to speak in a consolidated one voice, the very thing that we live and breathe by in the whole ABT framework, the need for the singular narrative. So he hit on that. I began to set up. And then he said, we really ought to be doing more to take advantage of story and storytelling. That drew me completely in. On that note, I got a hold of friends of mine at the Centers for Disease Control who knew him, said, would you please send him a copy of my book? And so we sent that to him. Then he got in touch with me and he said, any chance you'd be up for working with me a little bit? So for 4 months, I worked with him quietly, kind of behind the scenes, writing the script mostly week after week for the first part of his podcast each week, not the whole bulk of it, but the little intro thing, helping him kind of shape a little bit of narrative into that content, having these lengthy discussions, and through him getting insight into that advisory. He was one of the 13 original members picked for Biden's advisory board for the pandemic. Great guy. We spent hours and hours and hours on the phone. Then as the pandemic backed off in March or April, we kind of parted company. He was swamped with other things and I got going on a bunch of our stuff. That was when we ran our 3 sections of the course and yada, yada. And actually it was the narrative blitz that cropped up in April and that ate up all my time. And so that was when we kind of went separate ways for a while. And then about 2 or 3 weeks ago, we got back in touch. And then last weekend, we had a very intense discussion on, sort of cued by what Biden had done, that little moment where a week ago, he said that Facebook is killing everybody, you're killing us. And that was Biden shooting from the hip. I think we all know what he meant by that, but it wasn't very well crafted and it had all kinds of blowback and things of that sort. That pulled me kind of into examining that side. That's why I sent an email to Mike. We ended up last Sunday on the phone talking about it. And then we set to work on what might be an editorial eventually. But in the meanwhile, last Wednesday, as he was getting ready to record his weekly podcast episode, he called me up and said, would you mind if I talk about this in the podcast? And I said, sure, no problem. So what we're going to do right now is I'm going to play the little 6 minutes of him talking about that, and super sweet things that he said in there. Such a nice guy. And I'm deeply appreciative of these comments. So he starts off talking about me, and, this is kind of self-indulgence, I guess, to start with, but try and get past that into the substance of what he's talking about, which is innovation and in communication. So this is about 6 minutes long. And I think well, let's see, why don't you can mute if you want, Jen, and come back once we're done with this clip. I'll stay here so that people know that there is a live program in progress. And here we go, 6 minutes. It kind of speaks for itself.
Rather, I'm going to reflect on lessons I've been learning over the course of the last year and a half from a mentor that many of you are aware of. Dr. Randy Olson has been someone who is a godsend when it comes to the science of communication and has helped us with this podcast try to deliver a more concise and effective message. And Randy is someone who is ahead of his time in terms of understanding the issue of communication. He's a PhD in biology from Harvard. He became a tenured professor of marine biology at the University of New Hampshire in 1992. And then he changed careers by moving to Hollywood and entering film school at the University of Southern California. He has written multiple books on the issues of science, communication, and what we as a scientific community must do to effectively share that kind of information which results in change. And he's surely led the way on things around climate. Well, one of the things that Randy has really promoted, and in many conversations with him, I have come to agree, is how do you challenge the anti-science? I'm not going to call it misinformation, disinformation. I'm going to call it anti-science. And what do you compare that to? Randy has come up with a term which he owns, and I thank him for sharing it with me, called corrected science. Anti-science versus corrected science. What does that mean? Why is that important? And I hope this will resonate with you in understanding how we communicate with others with what's happening. If I say to you, inject yourself with bleach, everyone would agree, I think, who's listening to this podcast, that's anti-science. There's no scientific data to support that. But if I look and make the statement that N95 masks are not worth wearing, oh, wait a minute, maybe they are. That could be well understood as corrected science, meaning that we've made a journey over what's been needed or not needed to provide respiratory protection against this virus. Now's the time for us to actually begin to understand the anti-science versus corrected science and what this means. I have been challenged by the many different messages coming out of public health over the course of this pandemic, many which have confused people. Do you need a mask on, quote unquote, or do you not right now? I could go through a laundry list of those issues. When I was on Meet the Press last October, I actually said, we don't have a consolidated one voice with communications in this country. And that by itself is not a problem if it's a voice that is changing because we learn more. And as we learn more, we update what we do. And I think the problem is just getting worse. At this point, the public health community has been really confounded by voices of unproven ideas from outside the area of public health. We know that. I would suggest that the accusation of misinformation just isn't working. It hits the wall of our facts versus your facts and goes no further. It's time for us in the public health and the scientific community, I think, to take on a whole new terminology and a new approach. Science is an evolutionary process. Findings are stated, a model is created, the model is tested, new findings are stated, the model is corrected, the cycle continues indefinitely. That's what makes us better. So if we change a conclusion about vaccines or about mitigation strategies or about what's going to happen with the epidemiology of the disease, that's the cycle continuing indefinitely. So such a process does leave behind a trail of previous ideas and findings. This is the corrected science that needs a broad, simple label. The dismissed material from the past is not proof that the current thinking is wrong. It's only corrected science. And I think at this point, we lack that singular voice. How do we bring this about? We will continue to hear among those spreading misinformation, disinformation, as others have labeled it, their voice doesn't change much. They have a point, they stick with it, and they go on and on and on. The vaccines put a computer chip in you. They basically make you sterile, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think towards this end, we need to understand what do we do to promote the concept of corrected science. And I know that this may seem kind of obtuse, but I'm really concerned. Over the course of the next several weeks, we're going to hear all about more vaccine breakthroughs. And the challenge is going to be, wait, does this vaccine work or not? We're going to have big challenges as to who should get vaccinated and why relative to what their level of protection is in their community. And with each of these comes this kind of misinformation, disinformation. And what we need to do is figure out, how do we tell a story where we went from the earliest days of saying these vaccines are perfectly safe to one where, yes, young males are at a slight increased risk of developing pericarditis with that vaccine, but that in fact still implies safety, and it is much safer than getting the disease itself, etc. Our communication needs to evolve over time. To date, the current administration has helped create, I think, the hugely successful vaccination program that has rapidly evolved into a search for the right vaccine. Just think about it. We had this goal in mind of July 4th. We're going to hit this certain number and then everything was going to be okay. And now we're having this big surge. Well, if you look at the science, we need to correct our science. But that didn't mean we were wrong. That meant that we're learning more. That's the difference between disinformation, injecting bleach, and saying, now here's where we're at. And we've got to do a much, much better job of using corrected science. And Randy, I thank you for your input on this issue. I think it's very important.
Okay, so That's the clip from Dr. Osterholm. He's a great guy, and that was really nice of him to say all that. But more importantly, the substance of what he's talking about there, this statement that he says misinformation isn't working. That is exactly right. That's what Mike Strauss's segment was about in our narrative blitz. The same thing. All of these science journals and everything have said you need to combat misinformation with the right information. It doesn't work. It's your facts against theirs. This is narrative dynamics we're talking about. There's something else going on there. What is the solution? I can't tell you exactly right now, but what I can tell you is the same thing I said last week. This is where the field of evolution science has so much to offer to our society. If only they could bridge the gap and insert some of that thinking into the political system of this is how you improve things. Natural selection, the way that species evolves. I learned this at the feet of Dr. Stephen Jay Gould, the greatest communicator of evolution ever. And he said to us over and over again, look, at the core, it's a simple two-step process. There is variation in the beginning, and it's ideally random and in all directions. And then secondly, there's this deterministic process that is directional that's called selection. And it comes in. You have a species that produces a whole new crop of offspring for this year. And then the environment goes to work and selects the ones that have got the proper fitness and they survive. And it's that iterative process over and over again that you make things better. It's the same thing that designers go through in improving the design of a product. It's rapid iteration. And what we've seen right now that if I had the energy to beat my head against the wall and try and write editorials and try and get them published, I would try and do this right now. But I don't anymore. I'm having too much fun teaching the course. But the point I would make is that look at what just happened. Biden came in, created the giant 16 scientist committee for the science side of the pandemic, and then nothing for communication, no effort or interest or even identification of poor communication. And that's why I say tracks back to Osterholm was the only person that I saw or have heard of a major scientist who said, in addition to the challenges of creating the vaccine, we need to communicate well, and we haven't done that. So that's the starting point for all this. And then getting more specifically into this idea of it all begins by having this variation. If you don't have variation, if you're working with the same little pool of variation, you're having selection work on the same little thing over and over and over again, nothing new is going to happen because you're just trying to select from the same old stuff. It's that variation stuff that's crucial. And that's where it begins to get into this issue of all these universities, for example, or big institutions where we have this problem of all these silos, different departments that don't talk to each other. There's your sources of variation. If only they talk to each other, they could pool all this knowledge, then the system could go to work selecting what really does work. And you could start to get new things and change happening over time. That doesn't happen. So that leads then to the second bit of this discussion. Jen, if you want to come back, and then Matt, how about if you join us for just a minute or so here, because this is where we got going on this idea. 2 or 3 weeks ago, Matt and I were talking, and one of our groups that works with us is the FAA, Federal Aviation Administration, and their Flight Aviation Research Center in Atlantic City, New Jersey. And take it away, Matt. What were we talking about there?
Oh, we're talking about how a common thing that all these government agencies are talking to us about, or our clients, is that they're having a big problem with silos. And a representative from the FAA was saying the exact same thing. Like, each department in their one agency is a silo with its own culture, its own terminology, its own problems, and they don't have the communication skills to talk to other silos, other departments within their same agency, which is just crazy when you think about it. They're in the same agency and they can't communicate with each other. So that got me thinking, well, the ABT is the silo buster. That's where the ABT comes in. It gives you the tools you need to reach other silos with a common language, a common framework, find out what's important to them and important to you, and be able to communicate with each other. The ABT is a silo buster.
Perfect. Okay. And so when I was a kid, long ago, growing up, one of the black and white shows that we all watched was Superman. And week after week, there would be the bank robbers holding up the bank, and somebody would say, "This is a job for Superman." And they'd all look to the sky, hoping that Superman would show up. So we have a similar circumstance here. We've identified the problem, and now this is a job for Super History Woman, the Janis Joplin of history, our favorite faculty member for the ABT course, who will now be joining us, MacArthur Fellow, co-founder of the Center for the American West at the University of Colorado, Dr. Patricia Limerick. How are you today?
Oh, where is my cape? Oh, for heaven's sake.
She comes flying in from her library.
Rest for my super.
Okay, we have identified the problem for you, which is silos, silo busting. Now, Superwoman, come tell us how we go about busting silos.
Alrighty. So I'm going to appeal to pleasure because human beings seem to take that as an incentive. Pleasure. There's no better way to get high in a natural way that does not injure any cells than crossing from one silo to another. It is just the best way to get high. And it requires no infusions of substances or anything like it. It's just exhilarating, and it brings out the best in people, which is
okay. The power of storytelling rests in the specifics. Can you relate to us one story of exactly what you're talking about there, of a group that you crossed a silo into and the joys it brought you?
I sure can. I have a little problem here of too many of these cases. So I just do have to start out with the big framework that when I was a kid, I was good with words. I was very bad with math, which meant that I was shut out of science, and I had to say, well, I'll go with words. But there were many things about science that really interested me, and it was frustrating that I couldn't go there. So it was really frustrating just having a passport denied or something. It was just, and I'm deficient in math. I understand that. So I'm going to start with a dendrochronologist. So something happened that permitted me, I can't tell you how it happened. I was an assistant professor of history, and I ended up at a situation where I could have lunch with a leading dendrochronologist. Now, I did not know until the lunch, I did not know what a dendrochronologist was. So I couldn't have been the one who sought it out, because I could not have gone through life hoping to have such an experience. But it was so great. And I still remember the table we were sitting at, and I learned so much about how studying the age of trees through rings can tell you so much about what preceded you at the moment in time that you're at. I learned the word stochastic because I am brave and shameless. So when I started talking about things being stochastic, I said, you'll have to help me with that. I'm not there. He said, I still remember this. He used the funny comparison. He said, well, this is back when we used to have newspapers delivered at home. He said, well, every now and then your newspaper doesn't show up, and you really never quite find out why that happened, why that didn't happen. So why that paper was, yes, I know what that's like. Okay, so now I know what stochastic means. This is really good. So since then, if you put me in a room with a whole bunch of people, and Connie Woodhouse is one of the famous dendrochronologists of the Colorado River Basin, if she's in that room, I'll find her. I sense the dendrochronologist. I just think I need to go there. Now, the dendrochronologist says to me, why, I have some rather complicated calculations I'd like to invite you to consider. I'd have to say, oh no, please don't do that. Please don't do that. Such a good time. And that natural high will just, it'll plummet if you make me, I can do it. I can do it probably, but it's going to be a sad episode from being so happy. So how's that for a story?
That's excellent. Now, can you give us another story on the more practical scale of, you've told us some science groups and things that you've gone and spoken to, and I think you've brought them. First off, the dendrochronology thing, at the same time, it's amazing. There's a little bit of it that's not that surprising, you being a historian, because then isn't that what those tree rings show us is history? So there's a convergence with your discipline on that one, but that's very cool. But now, can you tell us a practical one of professional group that you've gone into and what you've gotten out of what they've gotten out of it?
I certainly can. I will say that I do think you're quite right about the dendrochronology thing being a place of overlap, except it doesn't usually overlap. Usually my people and those people are not together. And so that's a tragic thing, but it's easily remedied. My personal feeling is that you just have to really work on the fact that you have to interpret and translate. And so if I'm going to go meet with some biologists, I would not really trouble them or trouble myself by saying, well, here I'm an historian. I'm going to try to cross over and visit with you. I hope it will work. I don't know if it will or not. So I don't do that. I just say, let's talk about anthropogenic change. Because to any card-carrying ecologist or anyone or ornithologist, anybody will say, oh yes, anthropogenic change. We always have to think about that. It's code for history, but there's no reason to scare people by saying, oh, we're going to have someone from the
okay, wait a second. All right. So let's slow a few of these things down a little bit and run through that again. That's kind of awesome. So anthropogenic change is code for history. Right.
And that way you don't frighten anyone by saying, I'm from the humanities and I'm here to help you. Because that will
Is your experience that the scientists run a mile, Patty, when you tell them that?
Okay, so now we get to the biggest of my problems here, and Randy is very angry about this. He's very angry that nothing but joyous experiences, really. Maybe a few that were not entirely joyous, but mostly I have been so well received by the science people. It's been utopian. And this is too funny, I have to tell this story. The chemistry chair here many years ago, I said to him, he was a wonderful person. I said, I just need to meet some of the scientists who are not like you, because all of the scientists I know on the University of Colorado campus are so receptive and so willing. This meant John Burks gave a spectacular talk from my Center of the American West on how different labs' findings converged to give us an understanding of what nuclear winter might be. So this fellow, as an atmospheric chemist, he gave it was an historian's presentation about how these different labs had all interacted and so on. So anyway, so he's too charming. So that's bad. I know there have to be dredges. I just know there have to be dredges because they are in any field. So I say to my friend John, it's really a problem here because I only meet science people on our campus like you. And so I'm getting a very distorted view, and I need to meet some very narrow people who are just working in their labs and have no curiosity about the world beyond them, and just have a bunch of machinery that needs careful tending. And I need to go meet those people because I don't meet those people. And I have this very romanticized, distorted view of scientists. So I'll have to get over that. So my friend John Burks, he says, oh yeah, we could do that. We could take a tour. I think, what a wonderful tour. We'll take a tour of the chemistry department and we'll meet the dull, drudge-like, narrow people. That'd be so, I mean, of course, for me, I'm going, that would be so interesting. And then he totally screws it up. He says, you know, I think they would really enjoy meeting you. And I think, no, enjoy meeting me.
All right. So now we're going to start digging in on this, and you and I are going to lock horns here a little bit on our divide about this, because fundamental difference. You know, you are not bringing a problem solution dynamic to the science world. You're there doing those sorts of things, having fun with them. I am. I'm trying to change the science world, and I will live the rest of my life trying to change the science world. Michael Crichton could have tried to change the science world. He didn't give enough a damn. He eventually became a climate skeptic. I'm interested in trying to use the knowledge I've gathered the last 25 years to improve communication in the science world. And they're telling me to go away. They're good enough as they are, a lot of them. And so I am engaged with really ugly, nasty battles with a lot of scientists at times because they don't like being criticized. My first book, Don't Be Such a Scientist, wasn't in praise of scientists. It was, you people need to do a better job. We people, as a fellow scientist. So I'm locked in deep on that. Now, let me draw a parallel here that brings in Jen a little bit, which is there's a similarity between, I lived in Townsville for almost 3 years, and it's very different when you're an American living in Townsville, working at Ames and working on a daily basis and going to the stores as a local resident versus a tourist showing up for a week. So the tourists from Texas would show up and they, oh my God, the Australians, they're lovely people. They're so great. They're all just so friendly. Yeah, they're trying to get your tourist dollars out of you. It's different when you live there. I still have a lot of Australian friends that I love, and I had fun last week with the three of you, but there are some mean and nasty Australians, just like there are in this country as well. And you get a different perspective when you experience these things differently. So there's a difference there. And then the last thing to say to you, now that I've got you wound up, Patty, is you and I were talking the other day about Pollyanna, and you are given that luxury. You've got a personality, first off, that brings the best out in everybody. Maybe I don't. Maybe I bring the fight out of a lot of people, but you get to skate through those little science experiences and everybody loves you. But what we need is a lot of this problem solution work going on. And my last thing to say on that before I hand it over to you is this is part of our problem right now, is the two lead spokespeople for popular science in this country are Neil deGrasse Tyson and Bill Nye the Science Guy, neither of whom are working on any problem solution dynamics. They're out there cheerleading for science, saying science will fix everything in our society. And we don't, I mean, that's good. That's nice. But where did the voices go that are critiquing science and saying, we're not going to fix this stuff if you just hand it all over to science, as you've done with technology, with Facebook and with the virus and that sort of stuff. So, okay, that's my little piece. Now, let's hear your rebuttal, Patty.
Start on that. So first of all, your premise is completely wrong, which has to be addressed, because I'm actually trying to help too. I'm not a cheerleader.
What's the problem you're working on?
I'm working on the fact that they being scientists have important information that cannot reach the public. And the public needs to have that information. So my sense of mission came to me, if that's what it was, I guess it is really. I went to a meeting of Well, and also I do need to say this before I forget to say it, because it's really mean, which is if you think the scientists need to do better, you need to do better and getting them to do better. That's my.
I wish it were that easy.
Oh, well, it might be if you think about it. So anyway, so I went to I don't know, probably 30 years ago, I went to a meeting that I'd been invited to. I was not seen as an intruder. For some reason, I had been invited, and it was scientists and engineers trying to help Leadville, Colorado. Now we're getting really practical. Deal with acid mine drainage. That is one ravaged landscape around Leadville, and people stay. People don't. I mean, they stay there, and so I'm at this meeting, and we're having coffee and chatting, and I'm finding out really fast that the scientists and engineers, mostly from EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, they are really sad because the people of Leadville hate them. They hate them. Mm-hmm. And the scientists and engineers are actually trying to help you put this back together. And but the people of Leadville hate them. So I think this is criminal. These poor science and engineering people, nobody told them about the tensions between Western communities and the federal government. Nobody told them about that. And that's cruel. That's cruel just to say, go in and offer to help. I mean, don't do that unless you hate the EPA scientists and engineers and you want them to suffer. Then tell them just to go in and offer to help. So that for me was a sense of mission coffee hour where I just thought that is not right for these people to be sent out into the world with skills of great value. I mean, hydrogeology is not going to benefit from anything I do in terms of sampling and analysis. And that could benefit lots of people. So that was my sense of I could help with this. I could totally help with this.
Well, let me toss in there something that's come up a number of times in our course in the podcast from our good buddy Rick Nelson from North Dakota, who has this quote. It's something to the effect of all conservation problems are social, yet they're given to biologists to solve. And that's the same thing you're saying, which is biologists without that social dynamic and an understanding of it are really headed into a bad situation.
Right. And that's where I think we really do have to have a better plan than saying, well, the darn biologists, they need to go back for another year of graduate school. And that will turn them around. Depending on who teaches them, it may not. If they go for if they go for a classic humanities class, they may actually end up more jargonized and more obscure and more difficult to understand than they were when they only spoke science. So it's uncertain where they should go for help.
So Patty, can I share a really interesting conversation I was part of on Twitter over the last few days? One of my colleagues who's a physicist but has gone on to do all sorts of very interesting things, he proposed that the thing that made him the best scientist he could be was studying history and philosophy of science when he was a science student. And all these people came out of the woodwork, myself included, saying, yeah, I also studied history and philosophy of science. And this whole community of scientists who we know each other as people who are passionate about science communication, and many of us now working in that general area of science communication, all bonded over the fact that, many of us, including me, I have an arts degree, as well as my science degree, I have an arts degree and anthropology and classics and history and philosophy of science and English literature, and recognizing just how much all of those subjects have contributed to what I do as a scientist and a science communicator. And it was just this big love-in on Twitter that we're all like, yeah, me too. The humanities has been essential to what I do now.
And yet, let me jump back to the context that I set this all up in. This idea of where we are right now, which is a fundamental mistake, has been made again. The Biden administration put together the 16 experts on the science, and nobody talked about where's the 16 experts on communication, nor is anybody, there's no leadership, so nobody's even seeing that as a problem.
So Randy, you can't just claim that as a US problem. I wanted to jump in early to let you know that we have ATAGI, which is the Australian Technical Advisory Group on immunisation. And I'd heard a lot of people complain. And so I just went in myself and checked. And we also have 16 members, and not a single one of them has any background in communication. So we have our really highly qualified medical team that are advising our health minister on what the hell to do about immunisation. And I don't know how much you've heard, but we've had major faults and failures with communication. We are currently
exactly.
very lowly vaccinated, and there's not a single psychon person there.
Well,
and it's not just the communication; it's also the supply, and there's a heap of problems with our vaccine rollout.
It's a philosophy thing in the science world that is changing. It needs to change more rapidly. So, for example, back when I was getting trained as a scientist, people wrote National Science Foundation grants, and they put nothing in there about outreach. Then in the 1980s, they said, you know what, we got to start doing outreach. So they began to demand you had to put 5% of your budget for outreach. And then it became 10. I think it was up to 15%. I have said for a couple decades now, ought to be 40 to 50% of your budget. You know, you should do exactly. And that's that mindset, which is now that you got the 16 experts on the science side, where's your 16 communication people? And then matching that with the experience, I think I mentioned last week, 2010, they brought me to the CDC, the communications people, and said, we're going to put you in a room with groups of 30 to 50 scientists and see if they'll listen to you because you had tenure and you were a scientist, because they won't listen to anything we say. And there is an arrogance to the science world. And Patty, this is what I'm saying. You're trying to tell me I should be nice or whatever. I tried that route for 15 to 20 years. I got nowhere with it. Scientists do not listen. Peter Kariver, when he reviewed my first book in science, said, nice book, but the one thing he didn't address, the biggest problem of all, which is scientists do not listen. They get together, they bond together, they've got all the knowledge, and they're bullies. I mean, this is an arrogant male dynamic dimension to it, of them just trampling over people with their knowledge. They get into the rooms. And this is what Osterholm had told me, was that he had those 2-hour Zoom sessions where they had the 16 experts and they had the communications people. The first time he told me about one of those, he said, none of the communications people spoke up. And my first response was, that's because they're just not very good. But then I thought it through back to the CDC thing. Wait a second, it's not that they're not good. It's that they've been bullied into, how do you stand up against these scientists when they're spewing pure molecular biology knowledge of all of this technical stuff about the virus and everything else like that? And you're supposed to try and explain communication. It's a mismatch that has got to be acknowledged and worked on. And that's not going on. And it's evidence now that I think with this thing, these
that's
two
so
sides.
naive. Oh, it just makes me weep I'm not weeping, although I do have a handkerchief here if I need it. It's so naive and so silly. Okay, so maybe I am sometimes at risk of romanticizing scientists because I have seen the best of them. You are so far gone in romanticizing communications people. It just is really, it's so sad to think that.
Oh, I don't romanticize them at all. Yeah.
So, the silliest thing I ever saw in my life, and I'm going to try to speak a little bit discreetly on this one. Okay, so right, National Science Foundation put in broader impacts, and you have to have somebody to do communications and so on. That created a gravy train of very underperforming, I guess they called themselves social scientists. I don't know what the word science was. I don't know what the word social was doing that. It was, so I worked with a person, and I'm going to try to be a little bit vague. I was on a team that I actually did finally feel like I had to withdraw from. The person who was bring it together, synthesize the different fields, bring the people from different scientific disciplines together. I could make no sense of anything that person said. And then this story is so piteous, but it is a true story. At some point, this expert was showing us how he was going to bring findings from different fields of science together, and they would be brought together in graphs. And so he showed us there were like maybe 16 graphs on a slide. And I'm sitting in the front, and that Ms. Humanities was the one who spoke. The science people were just, I guess they were cowed, or I don't know what they were. Maybe they were bullied. So I'm the one who raises my hand and I say, maybe I'm a little bit confused here, but I can't tell what the axes are on these graphs. I can't tell if it's time one way, if it's intensity of environmental damage. I can't tell what the axes are. Well, there's squiggles, right? There's squiggles on the graphs, because that usually happens with a graph. There's a squiggle. So I can see that there's squiggles, but I'm just thinking, what is being graphed against what on the axes? This man said, I haven't assigned values to the axes yet. And I'm in the humanities, and I didn't do well. I did fine in math in school, but I was pretty feeble. So anyway, so I can't believe that happened. But that is a moment where you just think, well, that person.
You're the person when the emperor has no clothes goes parading by. You're the one in the crowd that says he's got no clothes. Nobody else is willing to say it. You're the one that says that.
But so if there were anything to the notion of scientists as bullies, I would have had no chance to intervene at that moment. all of those bullies would have been shouting, standing on their feet and shouting, how can you show us graphs that have squiggles that have no values?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'll divide with you on that. You're not talking at the highest levels. And the group at NASA that brought me in just a month or two after my visit to CDC, it turned into a support group for victims of scientist abuse. We had 8 of their communicators sitting in a room telling stories about being shouted at by scientists. Who one woman told about interviewing a scientist. He told her about 15 different projects he'd done. She wrote her article about the 3 most interesting. And within hours of it appearing, he called up and was shouting over the phone. She started crying as she told the story. He was saying, I talked to you about this and this, none of that. You'd wasted all my time. You came in my lab, blah, blah, blah. They do that in the real world on a daily basis. Not all of them. There's lots of great ones. But when you get up that highest level of some of the ones that are leading programs and things like that, it turns into that. It's not a pretty picture.
There's this is such a mismatch to what I got to see when I saw social scientists bullying, I guess, or maybe just boring. Maybe they just bored the scientists on that. But it seems very clear that the principal error you're making is that you think, oh, it's those meetings. It's when we all sit down in chairs and we're in rows and someone is giving a PowerPoint. That's when it's really important. That's when things are going to happen. Now, you may recall that I started this story about going for the hour of coffee, chatting with the EPA scientists. So the notion that the real action is going to occur when we're all sitting in rows and Professor so-and-so, Dr. so-and-so is giving a presentation. That is, I mean, I guess we have to do that because we have to have, not entirely sure where we have to do that, but we do have to do that. But that is not where anything worthwhile is going to happen.
That's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is the real problem is when you end up with 16 people on the science side advisory and 0 communications advisory side. That's the largest manifestation of everything.
I'm saying that you just told us a couple of stories about meetings where people, where scientists shouted at communications people and they cried.
Yeah.
But a meeting, why would you think that is humanity's greatest form of communication?
No, the meeting I was telling you about was just them having a venting session. To me, that's what they did. They pulled together 8 communicators to say, we want to share with you. You've just written this book, Don't Be Such a Scientist, that we completely understand what you're talking about. We want to tell you some of the stories that match with everything you said in your book. And that was the surprise to me, was the groups that reached out to me and said, your book was therapy for us as we read you talk about the dynamics that result in this sort of predicament that we live our lives in. I get this over and over again with every one of these large science institutions is this sad situation of oil and water. You've got the humanities people in communications, you got the science people in the sciences, and the cultural divide is huge.
I think that's not even accurate. There are humanities people, communications, I think sees itself as a social science and doesn't have the soft-headedness that you see in me. The sort of, well, we'll just try to understand each other. I guess we'll try to do that. That's not the communication thing. That's what I got from studying the damn Puritans. Because when I was a girl in graduate school, we had to keep reading documents. We had to read sermons by Puritans. We just spent hours of our lives, or wasted our lives reading about Puritans. And I thought, why are we doing this? There's such a tedious group of people and they're such a small sector. I mean, if you go by quantitative measures, we should never have to say the word Puritan. They're so tiny as a population. And by having been put through this miserable disciplinary process, bullied into reading the Puritans, I was bullied into reading the Puritans. I learned how to stay with it until I understand what someone who is mystifying me means. I learned that the first 7 times I read about Puritan theology, I thought, this makes no sense. Well, it doesn't make any sense. That's not the point. You just have to stay in there. And the moment that you finally get saved by grace, by God's grace, not by actual works, then you're there. Then you got the Puritans. You had convicts, Jen, so you don't really have the same stories. But you got
we can talk convict stories if you like, Patty.
So I did a little picture in silo busting and went over there twice to your distant land. So anyway, so that's the thing, is that's what you get from the humanities, is the stay in there until you get it, and it will mystify you, and you will have to be comfortable, as I was saying. Puritans were a little bit out of my reach, but I could say to historians who really understood the Puritans, I could say, what in heaven's name could that mean? Why would John Winthrop, how could John Winthrop be quoting the Bible while killing the Pequots? How does that work? How could that work? So that's the humanities. Communication has models and theories and approach. There are many brilliant communicators. There are many, many brilliant people in communications departments. What I'm telling you about today is about what I can do as a humanities person, which is really work the coffee hours. work the moments before everybody is seated in chairs of rigidity and wasting their time.
Well, let's then talk about, we know there's this problem, these cultural divides between silos, different disciplines that have their own language, things like that. Where do you see some value to the ABT framework in addressing that challenge?
Well, as you know, I'm quite the missionary here, speaking of Puritan.
Exactly.
I've been saved by grace. I have been. ABT is me what the divinity was to John Winthrop, I guess. So not everyone knows the name John Winthrop, but he was the lead Puritan at Massachusetts Bay. That's why I keep bringing him up. Anyway, so I feel that the last few months with a big project working with young historians, when I have used the ABT with young historians, this is not me going out to help scientists. This is me helping my own people to the best of my ability. Their minds clear. Their minds clear. And I've been using the comparison that it's like the rope between the farmhouse and the farmhouse and the barn in a blizzard. That once a young person who's written a very complicated dissertation with many dimensions, things she found in the archives, things that seemed they really needed to get in there, that person is in a blizzard and honorably in a blizzard and following the training program, which helps you get into a blizzard, and pushing them to do an ABT, they're still in a blizzard. They're not going to get out of the blizzard, but they have something they can hold on to so that they will not go wandering off into I'm really doing a Northern Plains giants in the earth.
No, that's a great analogy. That really is. I see exactly what you're saying with that. You're right. It's a blizzard of information. Yeah.
So that seems to be doing a lot of good for my people. I think every single one to whom I've made the pitch, the younger people are just totally on board with that. And then it's just as redemptive with science people, but pissing the science people off before you would attempt to redeem them. I should tell you, that's the difference. So I'm going to talk about missionaries for a moment. In the Pacific Northwest, there were Catholic missionaries and there were Presbyterian missionaries. The Catholic missionaries had a stance towards Indian people as sort of, well, nice to meet you. And we have some stories we'd like to tell you, but we don't want to interfere too much with what you're already doing. The Presbyterians had you live in darkness, you live in sin, you are a reprehensible group of people. We'll try to save you, but I wouldn't bet on it. So which missionaries did better?
The loud and obnoxious ones.
So Randy, clearly the problem is that you're just too loud and obnoxious and you piss everybody off. I think it's obvious now, right?
Once upon a time in your fine country, you had a prime minister who talked about all the silent achievers in your nation. Do you remember him? That was what Bob Hawke talked about. My good buddy Lynn Devantier always used to proudly proclaim that he was a loud underachiever. That's
I tried to keep my mouth shut before when you were bagging out Townsville, but I do feel compelled to point out that, Townsville in the 80s, that's kind of, frontier territory. It's far north Queensland in the 80s. I'm not convinced that you can judge a remote army town and say that that's what all Australians are like. But I'll move on. I didn't
say that. No, I said that you get a more nuanced picture when you live there,
of course,
then the tourists who come in, the tourists come and skate through and everybody's lovely to them because it's also superficial. Once you get there and live there, you realize that even the wonderful city of Melbourne probably sooner or later will have their own protests about masks because they have a diversity of people in their population. So, absolutely. Yeah. But it's a little of the Pollyanna syndrome that Patty and I talked about a couple of days ago, and she gets the benefit because everybody loves Patty, and so everybody brings their A game out for her, and then she thinks, oh, these people are always like this.
But Randy, I do think, for me, listening to you, I absolutely hear what you're saying, no question, and I've seen some really awful stuff, but I'm just not as jaded as you are yet, maybe because I'm just a little bit younger. I've also seen some of the stuff that Patty's talking about, and the very fact that I managed to create the job that I have shows that there are scientists who are on board with thinking all right,
we're going to put the skids on this right now. Hang on. I'm not jaded. I wouldn't be running this ABT framework course with all these science organizations, things like that, if I was jaded. But more importantly is just yesterday I had long lunch and discussion with Patty's buddy, a history professor who's working on a book on John Steinbeck. And the last biography that came out about John Steinbeck was titled Mad at the World. I was buddies with John Steinbeck's son, Tom Steinbeck. We spent a lot of drunken nights together. I learned a lot about John Steinbeck through him. He was not mad at the world. If you want to cherry pick the moments where he went on rants and things like that and glue them all together, then you can create a picture. Oh my God, this guy was mad at the world. Of course, that's what you do for writing a book like that. You don't want the day-to-day stories of, the wonderful pets that he had and the neighbors that all loved him and everything like that. You want those moments of extreme ABT contradiction. That makes for a great story that'll pull an audience in. And the next thing you know, oh, mad at the world, I guess he just had an anger management problem. No, he didn't. Trust me, he didn't. And same thing, if you want to pull out all the debates that I get into, glue those together. Oh my God, this guy's just mad at the world. No, I'm not,
But I'm not suggesting that for a second, Randy. And actions speak louder than words. And the very fact that you are working on the ABT in the way that you are proves that you haven't just decided.
The way you just said I was jaded. You told me I was jaded.
Well, I think you are, because I think you've had some really bad experiences. But jaded doesn't mean that you give up and walk away. They're different things.
It's so interesting. I looked at the word jaded. And it means, well, who's this? Some dictionary online. Tired, bored, or lacking enthusiasm. I don't know. Typically after having had too much of something, like a jaded appetite. Now, I'm not sure that's a very good definition of jaded. There may be a better one.
No, that's not how I was meaning jaded. I just think you've had a lot of bad experiences, Randy, and quite reasonably as a result of those experiences, you're incredibly frustrated.
No, I'm not that frustrated, but I'll give you a different definition for jaded, which is it means that you've got a member of your team who wanders the planet and is in Estonia at the moment named Jade, who we cannot figure out what in the world she's doing and when she will ever come back to your country or any other country. But she was with us last week, so that's a different definition of jaded. But yeah, Patty and I have spent many hours haggling over what we're in the thick of right now, so this is kind of fun.
Yeah.
Yes, Patty.
About silos, because one
yes,
of the
that's what we're here to talk about.
A reason, this is why some of it is, I guess, about me.
And we have the 10-minute warning, so take it away on silos.
So it's quite brief. Pretty early on with the Center of the American West, very early on, I recruited people from every imaginable discipline. And so when people came to a Center of the American West meeting, they were usually meeting people who'd been on the campus, but they had never met. So that's one reason why I had this utopian experience, because people couldn't come into the room thinking, oh, there's that person who's been driving me crazy for years. Maybe that person would drive them crazy, but they had not had the chance to develop the antipathy. So a couple of things happened early on, very soon after the center was created. An English professor said to me afterwards, "It is so nice to be around faculty members who think things can happen." And then a biology professor said to me, afterwards, he said, "I so enjoyed these meetings," which I think almost everybody did, because they were meeting people. It was fun, and they were getting high from getting out of silos. Just to prove my point, only caffeine in the picture, only caffeine. So there they were being happy. And the biology professor came up to me and he said, I thought about it today, and I think I really figured out why I so enjoy these meetings. And this is not necessarily exactly the remark I wanted, but he said, it's really comfortable. It's really great. He said, if I'm in a meeting with other biologists, or well, I guess in his case, even more with zoologists, he says, I'm thinking, am I more accomplished than he is? Have I got, where am I in relationship? Do I have as many grants? Where am I? So he said, I come to these meetings and I sit down and there's an archaeologist next to me. I can't begin to think, am I a better zoologist than he is an archaeologist? What possible metric? Because you guys are into metrics, so good. But he can't think of a metric. There's no metric. It doesn't work. And so then on the other side is someone from the creative writing program who is writing poetry. And so you think, well, I'm sure he's a better poet than I am, but is that the measure of anything? So I think it's the silo breaking that makes the better angels come out and dance. The better angels are just out dancing. So,
yeah.
And they're the cutest things when the better angels dance. There's nothing cuter than that. So,
I guess that's one of the sad things about academia, isn't it? That there are actually metrics by which the archaeologist could compare themselves to the poet, but whether we lay any store in those sort of metrics or not is another question.
Right, exactly. And of course, there are these committees in universities. Now, this is really sad because those are the committees where things should come together. The committee that reviews everyone for tenure and promotion and reviews across the board of every imaginable discipline. That's where it should really be. Okay, now we're seeing each other whole. Not necessarily. I do know people
Absolutely.
who sit on those committees who are changed people and do have an appreciation for other ways of thinking in other disciplines, but not always. Not
Well,
always.
And,
so
and that's kind of the point at the end of all this, isn't it? I mean, we've got to be really careful, I think, about the generalizing that's so easy to do and so appealing, because it's the big narrative picture, right? Like there are individuals here, and there are individuals who think very differently to other individuals.
well, to get more specific and mechanistically about this issue of can the ABT be of value in silo busting, I think this is a work in progress, and our incubator laboratory where we're studying it right now is in our working circles. That is the mechanism that we are studying, learning from. We've learned a lot in the last year and a half in running the course. And working circles is this little experiment where one person has got their narrative and 4 people are joining them. Quite often, none of them have any background in common with that person. So they're from different disciplines. And it's a half an hour of really productive discussion that works really well because they've all got the ABT framework in common. That gives them the common ground. They can use that as a tool. And I think that we're not yet ready to explain to everybody how to use the ABT for silo busting, but I think we're working on it. I think we've got a machine there that we're studying, building. And I think eventually, you know, in the dream scenarios, eventually we'll write a short little book like the Narrative Gym that would just be about working circles, what a working circle is, how it's worked. We've done 400 of them now, and every single one of them has had pretty much raves. You know, we've never had, Matt, can you give us the 1 minute summary of where we are with working circles, given that we're starting the course up again next week? What are we at? About 400 or so we've run, and tell us 2 or 3 sentences of the overall vibe with how they go.
Working circles, the vibe is generally positive, like all around. We tend to give like one of my favorite pieces of feedback from a working circle is, I thought my ABT was ready to go. I went in enthusiastic, and the working circle group ripped it apart, gutted it in the most positive, beautiful way. Like that's kind of the general vibe of working circles. That it's just this. It's everyone has tools. It's not like vague feedback, like, oh, I'm not quite feeling this. This isn't working for me, and I don't know why. Everyone has tools to take these things apart, work on them, make them better, even if you know nothing about the topic.
Lock up and I'll take it up. I'll take it from there.
Over 400 working circles that are just going crazy, jumping on working circles as soon as they come out. It's been a fantastic experience.
Right. So,
okay, perfect. That was great. You locked up a couple of times, so but not in a big way.
Randy,
and Patty,
I think that you're wrong in saying that
Sure.
you haven't really gotten this pulled together, because it is the fact that people do get to be fools. We'll have to go back to that. They do get to say,
yes.
well, you see, I have no pretense or claim to know what you're talking about, so I'm going to have to ask a dumb question. So that is a license. Everybody gets that license, nice little printed license with photo ID and so on. Everybody gets that. So that's its own excellent liberation. I get to say, I didn't quite follow you there because no one expected me to be able to follow you. You're an archaeologist. I'm not. So that's really good. And what Matt just said, that they have, they will tear into each other, and the shoe will be on the other foot really soon, really soon. So the person who is just masterfully taking apart someone else's statement is going to be masterfully taken apart, and knows that, and is recognizing that.
Well, and this is a cue for 3 more hours of discussion that we can't get into now. But I think at the core of all of that, the solution why this works is one word, and that is structure. And structure is the pathway to make these things work. And people don't want, I don't want to be constrained by structure. Well, sorry. It really works. That's what it characterizes everything that we do with the narrative training, is tons and tons of structure. And within those confines, everybody knows where they are, and they can do a lot of really good productive work that they don't have to worry about trampling over each other. So we're learning as we move along with that. And I am learning that we're just about out of time here. It has been awesome. Sorry that I couldn't agree with everything you had to say, Patty. I know you're used to having people around you that are all just your ultimate fans, but you know what you get with me.
Let's just say that the notion that everyone loves me would be hard to verify by a scientist, a humanist, or a social scientist. So there's no methodology that would establish that everyone loves me. So that's
all we would have to do is find...
I love talking to you, Patty.
Oh, well,
yeah, you're awesome. All we'd have to do is find one of those historians that labels you a revisionist, right? That revisionist Patty Limerick.
Some other time.
That'll be the next time we have you on. All right. We could do hours and hours, and we will do some more. Thank you so much for taking the time, Patty. Always fun. Jen, have a wonderful week, I guess. And then We're
Thank
gonna, you know what, next week, but here's what we're gonna finish on is that, what are we doing next week? I'm gonna record something with somebody somewhere, but then we're going, I think it's the week after that, we're doing the episode with Bruce Block on visual storytelling. And that then will be, I know we've got something scheduled for next Sunday.
We've totally lost track. It'll be great, Randy. Just let everyone know it's going to be awesome.
I should have had it written down, but promise you we'll get it out there. So, I know what it is. It's Park Howell and I recorded on Friday.
Yes,
his podcast. Yes, exactly. Talking about the new book, the business version of the Narrative Gym book. So we're going to simultaneously post it on our blog, ABT Time, as well. And we got these two great quotes from the new book, which are that the book gives an unfair advantage to people in their business practices with the ABT, and the other one calls the ABT the holy grail of business communication. So there you go. Okie dokie. On that note,
congratulations.
Yay. Thank you, Jen. Thank you, Patty. And everybody have fun. Talk to you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.